Hello, I'm Cheryl Willis Hudson.
And I'm Wade Hudson. And welcome to Just Us and, a series of interviews with book creators and those who get the books into the hands of readers. Today, we are so happy to have an opportunity to engage in conversation with Pat Cummings, illustrator and author.
Pat Cummings is the creator of more than 30 books for children, and she's the recipient of many awards and honors, including a Coretta Scott King Award. She's a leading advocate of diversity and inclusion in children's literature, and she's been a mentor to many aspiring authors and illustrators. She also teaches at Parsons School of Design and Pratt Institute, and she's also a board member of the Authors Guild and SCBWI, Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. Welcome, Pat.
It's so good to see you guys, and 30 books is nothing. Floyd did those last week. I mean, it's like, when I watched your program with Floyd, and I was like, he's done like hundreds of books. I gotta get busy.
Yeah. Well, tell us then, what was your first published book and how were you able to get your foot into the door?
I should say that when I was at Pratt, I got interested in doing children's books because I was freelancing. I was doing children's theater posters. And so I had a portfolio full of children's pieces, and I wanted to go, get into publishing. And back in the day, in the good old days, you could actually go to see publishers. They would sit down with you. They would go through your portfolio. It was shocking. And no guards at the door. But I'd seen everybody in town and gotten nothing. And every professor that I had told me it's impossible to break into children's books. Unfortunately, when you're 20, you don't hear these things. It just doesn't register. I can't, what? And what I did was, there was an organization, the Center for Multicultural, no, it was a multicultural book review. It was the Interracial Books for Children. That's what it was.
Yep.
Remember that? The Council.
Council of Interracial Books for Children.
Which I believe is how Walter Dean Myers got his start. He did
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Do that, right? Yep. And they had asked people to put photographs and illustrations in the back of their newsletter, and it went out to all the publishers. And one of the publishers that I had been to saw one of my illustrations in there and called me and said they had a book for me to do. And they didn't say, come in and show us your portfolio, or we're thinking about it. They said, we have a book we want you to do. And I was like, okay. And I had been to see that publisher, but what I didn't realize and took away from that was, you can see one editor, and that does not mean you've seen everybody at the house. You shouldn't stop just because one editor said no. Because what I found over the years is, you could see somebody in one office with your cat story, and they were mauled by a cat when they were little, and they will never buy a cat story, and you wouldn't know that the person in the next office loves cats. So it can be that whimsical and that particular, So I went in to see the editor, and she said, do you know what you're doing? And I was like, yeah. And she said, do you have any questions? I said, nope. And I just didn't know.
What was that first?
It was Eloise Greenfield. They were doing a remake of a story that she had done. It was called Good News.
Okay.
And they were reissuing it. And so they asked me if I knew what I was doing or had any questions. I just didn't want to lose the job. So I said, I know what I'm doing. And I had no clue.
So how soon did Just Us Women follow that?
That was a good few years. I'd say about 3 or 4 years.
Okay.
Because after doing that first one, it started to move along after that. You know what I mean? You get to know the editor, you work with the publishing house. Although I do remember the editor-in-chief at that house where I did Good News taking me into his office and showing me a map. And it had pins all over it. And he showed me down south. He said, this is where the readers are, and there's not hardly any market. Black people don't read. That's what he said to me.
Wow.
We heard that too.
In the 70s. That was in the mid-70s.
Yeah.
And it was kind of shocking to me even then that he would try to single it out like that, But they would base their marketing on the fact that they didn't expect it to sell here, 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 and here.
Yeah. We did an interview with George and Burnett Ford a couple of weeks ago in this series, and George talked about your activism in the early days, and he said that you were very great at organizing and bringing people together. Uh, what inspired you to become an activist during this period of time?
It didn't feel like activism so much as like self-protection almost. Do you know what I mean? I wanted to be in this business. I wanted to learn about it. I found there were other people who knew more than me and people who wanted to know more. And I felt it made sense to band together. There was a group I'd been offered a horrible manuscript. You know, I hope the author is not listening. It was a terrible manuscript that could never I told the editor, if you publish this, you're going to get eaten alive. It was so racist. It was just awful.
Mm-hmm.
And it bothered me that the editor didn't realize it. She'd been given this manuscript by somebody who said, well, that's the way it is in the ghetto. And I was like, oh, come on. You know, I said, so there was a group that was formed. I didn't form it. I think it was teachers and writers that formed this group. And it was children's book creators who wanted to get guidelines for publishers. And I got involved with that group. And that kind of just spun off because they were trying to come up with guidelines to give publishers to say, these are healthy representations and these are not, you know? So I think I got in through that. Plus, when I had that first book and I didn't know what I was doing, I knew somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody who used to date Tom Feelings.
Right.
And so I called him up, you know, and I was like, Tom, you don't know me, but I need help. And he was so helpful and giving and like walked me through all the steps of putting together a book. You know, he was working on the middle passage.
Right, yeah.
It took him 20 years to finish that book.
I know,
so
we know. Yeah.
hero in terms of deadlines, but he walked me through that. And the thing was, when he did, I felt so thankful. I wanted to thank him. And he said, help others, just help somebody else.
You know, the name of that group, one of those organizations, I guess there were plenty of organizations then, but that was Black Creators for Children.
Yeah.
And can you tell us a little bit more about that? You said Tom gave generously. What was that organization like? What was your involvement in Black Creators?
I would just go to meetings, and I was helping work on guidelines and waiting for the guidelines to come down the pike. It was, everybody in it was like writers and illustrators, and they were very interested in making sure that publishers had really clear guidelines about what was and what wasn't acceptable or healthy to put in front of little kids, because it was kind of like they didn't know. I remember you guys telling me way back when at some ALA how a publisher had come to you and asked you how to market to Black people.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And it was kind of like bizarre to me that it took this kind of thought that they really had to stop and question people because they really couldn't think for themselves what's healthy to put in front of a kid. And the manuscript that I had been given, I mean, the parents were screaming and yelling, the neighbors were screaming and yelling, there were rats and roaches. I was like, seriously? It had an underlying theme that was positive, that was good, but there was so much stuff on top of it, you know? So that group really tried to like parse out, here, if you're going to represent somebody and you're gonna show some negativity, show some spectrum, you know, some balance or something. So that was one group, but we, you know, I was doing a lot of freelance at the time, and we would run into issues. So we had like the Black Art Directors group, where we got a bunch of art directors together to talk to illustrators, to just help them get into some of these bigger organizations, magazines, newspapers, ad agencies that weren't really hiring Black people. I'm not gonna say they weren't hiring, but it was just, you know, we were underrepresented.
Right. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your style, and we like to talk about craft when we talk to authors and illustrators. What makes your style unique or special, and what kind of medium do you use? Can you share some of that with us?
Yes, I can show you some pictures.
Sure.
If the screen doesn't explode, I will share a screen and I will show you. If you can see my desktop.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah. Okay.
And I will show you this. Me and technology, not best friends, but this is the kind of stuff that I was doing when I started. I tend to draw very realistically. And I would do a lot of black and white for magazines, Black Enterprise, The Village Voice. And usually it would be, I'd get called in for things that had to do with race, you know what I mean? So that first piece would be about hiring opportunities, Black versus white, when you're equally skilled and have, you know, equal credentials, how kind of like the Black candidate is just not going to be seen as easily, or trying to catch a cab in New York. if you're Black, you know, some of the techniques that you might have to use to get a cab, that kind of thing. But I would also do like historical things that was for Black enterprise about different inventors and things. It was pretty realistic. And I felt like it was realism with a kind of a graphic edge to it, you know?
Gorgeous, yeah.
Yeah, great.
And then I started doing the picture books. And when I started, you had to do, you know, pre-separated art. You couldn't work in full color. So I started with the black and white. And then you'd have to like do all kinds of layers of color yourself. You'd have to add the colors yourself. Storm in the Night was, I like to change styles, or not change styles, but change medium certainly. And so for Storm in the Night, I wanted to use acrylic because that's a story that takes place all in the dark. And everything is illuminated by thunder and lightning and, you know, just the sky. So that's a medium with acrylic where you can start dark and build on top of it and paint white on top of black even, and it won't blend. You know, it's a very plastic medium. And then with C is for City, that was gouache and pencil and ink and pastel. Because I have to admit to you guys, when I'm working 3 o'clock in the morning and I need yellow, I will pull out crayons if that's all I got, you know? I'm always admiring people who know what they're doing. I have no idea. I sit down in front of a piece of paper and hope for the best, you know? And so I will use all kinds of medium, whatever it takes to like get me the feeling I want. Like if I want it to be soft, I'll go to pastel. I want to show you this one because my style changed a tad when I met Mike Curato, because he came to my class and was talking about combining digital with traditional work. Chandra Strickland calls it traditional, something like that. Tradigital. And so that combination is interesting to me. But I tried it on this book because I met this little girl, Eva, who is my friend's granddaughter. And she came over from England. And when she was going back home, her parents were afraid that they were going to lose her in the airport possibly. And so her father gave her his phone number and said, put this in your shoe. If we get separated, have a policeman call me, right? She said she didn't need that because she had this picture of her parents. And I couldn't stop laughing when I saw that picture because she thought this will of course identify her parents. And so I drew it on a, you know, this thing missing because I thought from her point of view, her parents are the ones who are missing. And it tickled me because I took it to a publisher and she's like, let's do this. And so it turned into a book about, you know, where is mommy? A little girl waking up and finding her mother is gone and having to go find her. And that's how I used Eva's picture, by cutting it down to just mom and the thing. But this was a combination of drawing the original, painting it with watercolor and pencil, scanning it, and then working with it. And the reason, one of the big reasons, aside from Mike's inspiration, was that the editor said, well, if it was digital, you'd have more time. I was like, oh, it's digital. So suddenly this became digital art. And it just has been the one change I found, because like even working on something like this, I do one-off pieces every now and then. This was for a Beatrice Potter collection, and you were supposed to pick out your favorite character. And I liked Mr. Todd because he was very wily. But it was a combination of, you know, traditional and the digital. And then when I was working on the book for you guys, which I loved that you gave everybody an opportunity to respond. We rise, we resist, we raise our voices. I think it gave everybody at that time who wanted to say something and wanted to do something and wanted to talk directly to children about it. This really was a wonderful opportunity. So I collected the headlines that bothered me, that I wanted to address, and tried to lay them all out so that I could use them as a background for the poem and the picture that I was using, because I really did feel like this was an opportunity to talk directly to children and tell them, you know, it's a horrible time. The headlines are terrible. We got you. You know, everything is going to be okay.
Beautiful.
But now, you see, I've moved on because I didn't do this illustration. This is Erwin Madrid, who did the cover for Trace. And now I'm an author. I've moved on, and I'm just in love with middle grade. And I just want to show you a bit about this book because it came around. I had heard a couple of stories that blended together, and I read about the draft riots in New York in 1863. All those fires in that picture, all those fires were set all over Manhattan. And it was amazing to me, all the spots around the city that were on fire, because when white men found they were being drafted to go into the war,
Right.
they, of course, they didn't want to leave. They didn't want to leave their homes and their jobs. I understand that. And if they had $300, they could get out of it. And it just was totally unfair and really biased. But the reaction was to set fire to the city and to kill Black people. And they set fire to this children's orphanage, the Colored Orphan Asylum, in the picture down below. There's some girls in the playground of the Colored Orphan Asylum. And they set fire to it and they burned it to the ground, to the ground. And so that to me was so disturbing and moving, and also the impetus for a story, you know? So I thought, because some accounts that I read said that one child was killed. Most said that all the kids got out. But it was so disturbing to me that I started doing a lot of research into the period and did a story based on that, based on a ghost living in that space. And if you can believe it, I got misinformation on the internet, and it said that on the ruins of the orphanage was built the New York Public Library. And I thought, ooh, you know, and so I put the ghost in the basement of the New York Public Library. But one thing, last thing I wanted to show you is doing the research, history was just so, it's always been so fascinating to me, but I wanted it to be fascinating to kids who read it too. And there's so many interesting things, like I found out Jesse James was a postal, a Pony Express rider at 12, you know, what? And this picture at the top, because photography was so slow and they couldn't get kids to sit still very easily, they would disguise the mothers as chairs. And isn't that eerie? And mom is sitting underneath that. That is so friggin' eerie to me. But it just, those kind of things to me made history come very much alive. And doing a book like that, I wanted to put in it a lot of the stuff from history that I found fascinating, but tie it into a modern day kid. You know what I mean? And so it's a 13-year-old Black boy who's living in Brooklyn suddenly, and he runs into this ghost. But I'm totally seduced. I'm talking to writers, so you understand. It is terribly.
Great.
Pat, you grew up in a military family that traveled around the world.
Mm-hmm.
How have those experiences in different countries, different lands, shaped your worldview, and also shaped your art?
Well, it definitely, you know, I'm always surprised when people tell me they remember their first grade teachers and stuff like that, because I'm like, come on, you know, because I didn't go to the same school twice until I got to 11th grade.
Wow.
And so it was constantly moving, and art was the tie. It was the thing that I could join an art club. I could come into a new situation and get comfortable more quickly. You get to know people more quickly. But like when I was really little, we lived in Germany, and my mother and father would take us out along the Rhine Valley, and we'd visit these castles. So you'd be walking through these stone castles, and then she'd read us fairy tales. It was all very real. Do you know? It came alive. It was like I could imagine dragons flying by because you're up on top of the hill looking down on the Rhine, and you're looking through a castle wall, you know, window. And then when I was about 10, we moved to Okinawa, and the front page of the newspaper often would have stories about the ghost, the Naho ghost, who would haunt taxi drivers on Route 1. There was only like one big main road on the island. And the fact that all this fantasy was real-ish, I think had a big impact on the kind of work that I like to do. Like, I really love fantasy and I'm drawn to it. And the separation between the spiritual world and the real world, because it was so, I'm not saying the fabric was thin in like places like Okinawa, but it was a little bit more palpable. And when you're a kid and you don't speak the language, I didn't speak the language in Germany, I didn't speak it in Okinawa, I mean a few words, right? But I remember in Okinawa going out with my friends into the villages, just walking around, and people were very friendly and very, very, very nice, and they'd give us candy and stuff. But you'd run into people that you believed were witches. They'd have, you know, sticks on their heads, and we'd run into water buffaloes. I mean, it was just like, it amazes me thinking back, because my parents didn't worry about us.
Mm-hmm.
We'd be gone until the sun started to go down. You knew you had to be in by the time the lights came on. And so we'd be wandering these Okinawan villages, and there wasn't a lot of separation. The thing that I took away from that was, first of all, in my work, I feel like I have access to the planet. Do you know what I mean? I feel like I can put anything in there that I want to put in there, any culture. And I know that's been a big debate, but I feel like if it's respectful, and if it's done properly, you have access to it. Nobody thinks twice about going out to eating Mexican food one night and Chinese the next. You have access to the cuisines. So I don't have an issue with that. What I had an issue with was any kind of disrespect for it. When I came back to the States, I was about 12, I think, and I saw an ashtray, a Buddha ashtray. And it just kind of shocked me because I just come from a country where Buddha was a god.
Right.
And you couldn't put Jesus Christ on the cross in an ashtray. You know what I mean? It was just so incredibly disrespectful. And so I don't think I would have had that perspective about respecting other cultures if I hadn't traveled around like I had. And I don't think I would have had maybe that love for fantasy or being drawn to fantasy so much if I hadn't been exposed to reading fairy tales, going to castles.
Well, you've done that.
Seeing ghosts.
That, and it shows up in your work, Beauty and the Beast, and the range of multicultural kids that you see in your drawings. They are natural. It's a part of it. Is there something that is next for you with either fantasy, with illustration? What's next on your drawing board or on your writing pad? Can you share?
Technically, what's actually due? The deadline. I'm working on another middle grade novel. I took a character out of Trace, who I really loved, and she's a little bit psychic, and I'm doing a story about her. But she's and I'm trying to reference some of this moving around all the time. It's a kid who's moved around way too much, and what I find is a lot of people who are in the military, a lot of kids, and even in my own family, some of us wanted to plant. We want to be in one spot only. And I have one sister who's a diplomat and she constantly is on the move, constantly. So it has a different effect. And I'm trying to think about characters like that who are constantly on the move and what it does to you as a child. It has different effects on different people. But there's that. And then there's a story that I've been trying to develop for a long time, a picture book that here's the truth. I'm taking them straight from kids I know. Like Eva, okay? I did pay Eva, okay? But I'm telling you, I run into these kids and they tell me these wild little stories, and I'm thinking, oh, that's a story.
It's a story.
And so I'm working on a picture book. I had talked to Dan Santana about this book he did called Lift, about, when you get on the elevator and little kids always want to be the one to push the button?
Yes.
Well, apparently, they turned it into a story. And I'm thinking there's stories all around you. So I have folders like about this deep of stories I want to get to. But the one I'm under contract for, yes.
Okay.
Well, Pat, as a mentor and also as a teacher, what are you seeing that's coming from aspiring illustrators and writers now? Anything new or different that's sort of coming?
I'm seeing like some really interesting styles. Do you know what I mean? It's like my students do some really interesting styles. It's very loose and free and interpretive and much, I think, freer and more graphic and more sophisticated. Mm-hmm. We used to hear the term sophisticated if you came in with a style that was too artistic or too painterly or something. So I'm seeing a lot of styles now that I would have, that I know would have been called that earlier. And I'm also seeing this move towards graphic novels a lot. It's getting younger. Mm-hmm. And I have students who are working in styles that are very graphic novel-ish, but for younger kids. And I like seeing that. What I love is that there's so many great stories coming and there's no end to it. And you can tell that same story. You can tell a story about a little kid getting a dog again and again and again.
Right.
Because every semester, really, I have like 10 stories and I can just tick them off as kids do them in class, but they're all done with their own twist. Mm-hmm. They're all fresh and there's a new crop of kids coming. So I'm always very hopeful about it.
So can you tell us then how our readers, our viewers can get in touch with you about your work?
Yes, I'm, okay, my website is very crusty. Periodically, I kidnap somebody and try to get them to work on it, but it's patcummings.com. or I can be reached at write2me@patcummings.com. Write, the number 2, me, at patcummings.com. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. I'm pretty easy to find. Yeah.
Sounds great. Now we're ready for our lightning round. Ready? If you can just answer, we're going to ask a couple of questions and give us the first answer that comes to mind. Okay?
Okay.
Tell us your favorite book.
My favorite book. Okay. Haruki Murakami. The last one that I read, I think, was my favorite. But no, I have to change that now. Yeah, I'll stick with Haruki.
Okay.
Haruki writes adult fairy tales, so I had to stick with him. It's Killing Commendatore was the last one I read.
Who is your favorite author or illustrator?
Oh man.
Tuffy.
Okay, you're putting me on. Walter Dean Myers was one of my favorites. That's easy to go with. The Dylans are, they do beautiful work. I'm in love with their work, but I have too many favorites. Yeah. It's like picking favorite children, right? That's a tough.
Good answer.
Yeah.
Who has influenced you the most?
My parents, my mother and my father, definitely, because their attitude was go do it. It was never like, there was not a single thing that was in your way except for you, and I think their influence was, even though I think I found out years later they had fears about going to New York. My father did say to me, New York eats 18-year-old girls, and I'm like, yeah. But they were both very much into your independence and going out and getting what you wanted.
What type of music you like to listen to when you want to unwind?
I listen when unwind. Most writers and illustrators that I know are always working. So unwinding time, I'd say jazz and Brazilian music. I love Brazilian music. It varies, but when I'm working, it'll be something like jazz or Brazilian music, because I find other things with too many words are distracting. I start singing along and I can't focus.
So, what is there one thing that you'd like to do that you have not had the opportunity to do?
I actually would not mind seeing the pyramids. I'm not getting on a plane anytime soon. There are places I'd like to go, but in terms of doing things, I've been pretty active. I've covered a lot of bases. So I think the pyramids Bali. I'd like to go to Bali. I wouldn't mind seeing that either.
Good answers. Well, Pat, we're coming to the end of this conversation, but it's been great. And we want to thank you for joining us at Just Us and also our viewers. We want to thank you for listening in. We have more in this series. We want you to come back and remember that
good books make a difference. Thank you, Pat.
Thank you guys. Seriously, for all the years of producing wonderful, fabulous books. It is so thankful. I'm so thankful to know you're there.
Yeah, and you as well. You've been a pioneer also.
Take care, you guys. Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.